Hiya David, thank you for the footage. Just my thoughts on your golf swing and how it relates to the issues that you described in your email. First of all, I've left those screenshots up simply because it's demonstrating that there's a lot of really good stuff in your golf swing. There's a few things in there that people may mention to you, such as the club face looking a little bit short. So club points a little bit, if you will, the club face points a little bit skywards at the top. That really is because, if we've got a relatively strong grip, but not weak, not excessively strong, but on the strong side, the club face would tend to look a little bit more hooded than a lot of players at the top anyway. Add to that the fact that you tend to have a very flat left wrist. There's not a great deal of hinging of your wrist during the early part of your swing. That adds to, as you can see, the very little wrist cock. By the time the left arm gets parallel, the shaft isn't fully loaded. That's not a bad thing. Some players make that work very well. I'm just pointing that out because it may get mentioned to you under the context of it being a bad position. It isn't really. The position we're seeing at the top is appropriate in the sense that we've got a slightly stronger left-hand grip than a lot of people you'll see at your golf club, as a lot of good players do, which I'm a fan of. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. So slightly stronger left-hand grip, added to the fact that we don't cock the wrist quite as much as some players would on the way back, would lead us to have quite a flat left wrist at the top and a slightly hooded club face. So it can certainly work. I've played with more good players throughout the years and observed more good players throughout the years who make your position work than I have who have a more neutral club face and a little bit more cut position at the top. Those players have tended, in my experience anyway, to have more directional problems than players who look like you do at the top with a flatter left wrist and a more shut club face. So if it does get mentioned, take it on board. If you do want to soften up the club face, do it by cocking the wrists a little bit more. If we look at Grant Waite here, during the early part of his backswing, there's an incremental loading of the wrists, so the wrists are cocking gradually so that the wrists are a little bit more loaded, approaching sort of 3/4 of the way back. With yourself, the wrists don't really do a great deal early in the piece, and as a result, by the time we get to the same sort of position as we see Grant in, there's a little bit less loading of the wrist, which is why the shaft of the club is pointing here rather than here. So an earlier loading of the wrist with a little bit more cupping it, or a little bit more cocking of the wrist, would result in a little bit more neutral position when viewed from down the line. Do you need to do it? No. The only reason I'm touching on it is because if it does get mentioned, you need to know how to combat it. One of the biggest issues that I've got, or some of the biggest issues that I've got with your action, are during the downswing, we get out in front of that red line a little bit too much. Whereas what we're looking for is a stable axis. So we do want the weight to move forward in the downswing, but we want the weight to move forward by the hips moving forward rather than the upper and lower centre moving forward. So what we've got with yourself is a situation where the centre of the shoulders and the centre of the hips do not separate enough. Both centres get out in front of the golf ball. Now the effect that has is that as you move both centres forward, the wrists start to uncock. So we haven't loaded the wrists a great deal on the way back, but then the wrists start to uncock quite early as both centres drift out in front of the golf ball. What we see with Grant Waite here is we see a much more stable upper centre. The lower centre is moving much more forward, isn't it? You can see the hips are moving forward. So the centre of the hip girdle is moving more forward, so we've got more linear movement of the hips, and there's much more separation between, I'm just going to put an arrow on here for us, centre of his shoulders and centre of the hips have separated, whereas with yourself they haven't separated quite as much. The problem we have now is as the radius expands, so as the wrists start to uncock, we have to get the head coming off the wall to prevent the club. So we're going to gain height now to prevent the club digging in the ground, because the image that you're seeing on the far left is a very wide radius. So the standing up and the head coming off the wall is to prevent the club digging in the ground because the radius is too wide. So we've now lost our inclination to the ground. Now, if the hips were to separate more and slide more, that would help keep the right shoulder down and keep the head on the wall and allow the player to maintain his inclination to the ground. So in your case, the fact that you make the first move where upper and lower centre both go forward creates a situation where the wrists start to uncock, which means you now have to push up out of the ground, bring the head off the wall to prevent the club crashing into the ground. And I've put driver up there just to show you that you do exactly the same with a driver. Now, depending on the club, will give you maybe slightly different situations through impact. With an iron a little bit shorter, club head's a little bit easier to control. We may just start blocking a few out to the right. And we may flight the ball a little bit low on occasion. With the driver we can hook this thing so far left, potentially. Or we can also push it so far right, club's further away, harder to control. You can see on that particular shot, there's quite a high rate of closure on the way through. We're hitting out at the golf ball excessively. The hips are tucking under. But they sort of have to because of what we see here as you change direction. There's a very good drill. I'm thinking of ways of you combating this initially would be when you're practicing at the range. Just going to bring that one up now on the full screen. When you're practicing at the range, we need to be working with the alignment canes, and we want to put an alignment cane about, let's say, 2 inches, 3 inches to the right, to the left of your head. It could be that you get a friend to hold the club there. Don't hold it right up against the side of the head. Give yourself a little bit of room. And then what we would want to do is from the top, we'd want to feel like we never move into that cane. You see, the cane was there now, we'd be moving into it. And what that's going to do is that's going to encourage the upper centre, so the centre of the shoulder turn, to stay fixed rather than driving forward. It's going to encourage the lower centre to push forward a little bit more, which in turn will increase the amount of, I beg your pardon, ignore that last line, will increase the amount of axis tilt we see here coming into the golf ball. There's also, if you visit my channel and go to the drills and conditioning section and go to drills and conditioning number 2, you'll find a very good drill there that was given to me by an instructor called Martin Park, and it's about maintaining accumulator 2, which is the cock in the wrist. I demonstrate the drill for you on there, so it's drills and conditioning video number 2, and the drill relates to maintaining the wrist cock from the top of the backswing all the way through impact. That would be a very good exercise for you. There's also, I'm going to bring up now one of my pupils who I was doing an exercise with earlier this week that would be very appropriate for you, and it may just take me a second or two to find this on here. And this again is about sort of maintaining the angles, increasing the amount of hip slide that we can get, and increasing and improving the amount of separation between the upper and the lower centre. So I'm just going to scan through here and find Stuart's session for you. I think it's this one. Yeah. And Stuart's goal here, the task is from the top of the backswing. Stuart has to get the butt of the club to line up with his belt buckle by the time the shaft is parallel to the ground. Now, as he does this, it encourages him to maintain the angle in his wrists in the early part of the downswing. Which is tightening the radius of his swing. And if we look at the difference between that position and the position we see ourselves in, you'll start to see that it's very different indeed. You see how the left arm hasn't really released. The angle in the right arm is being held on to too long. But the angle between the wrist and the left arm is being thrown away. What we've got with Stuart here, what he's demonstrating is the left arm is moving away from the right shoulder more. The angle between the left arm and the shaft is being maintained for much longer. But the right arm is starting to straighten out a little bit more than what we see with yourself. So very good drill for you. The feeling that you need to create is trying to maintain the wrist angle for longer during the early part of the downswing, tightening up the radius of the swing. You'll also see some very good examples on my channel of players doing this. There's a lady called Christina Allen. If you watch some of her recaps, she's worked extensively on narrowing or tightening the radius of the swing during the early part of the downswing, and has been having some success with it. But mainly, hitting shots initially with a cane to the left-hand side of your head, a couple of inches, just to stabilise the upper centre, to stop that upper centre drifting forward. So don't have it right at the side of it, have it a couple of inches away, and learn to move the weight forward from the top using the lower body rather than using the lower and upper body together. Both centres moving out in front too quick, creating a sort of uncocking of the wrists, which in turn leads to your other problems when viewed from down the line. So impossible to maintain your inclination to the ground when you're uncocking the wrists so fast in the early part of the downswing. So we want to create more of the look that you see on the far left. And once again, the feeling for Stuart there from the top during his drill was to try and feel like the butt of the club was in line with his belt buckle by the time the shaft got to parallel. Stuart's recap is going to be the recap just before yours on the channel. We did some other work on tightening the radius of Stuart's swing using a few other drills that are mentioned on that video, so that might be worth a little watch for you. But more of that feel and look coming into the golf ball. With the looks of it, you do film your swing quite a lot when you're practicing. Hopefully you do. The position you want to try and police more than anything is the butt of the club in relation to the lead leg, to the trail leg, should I say. We want to try and move the butt of the club and the left arm, so that they're much more in line with the lead leg by the time that, with the trail leg, sorry, by the time the shaft gets parallel with the ground. Once you're tightening up the radius of the swing, and once you're sort of separating the two centres to help improve the inclination to the ground, try and feel like you max out the right tilt in your finish. So try and hold your inclination to the ground a lot longer in your finish, like you see with Charlie Wee here. Let's get his footage up. After he's completed his swing, there's the inclination to the ground. In the through swing, that's maintained. So when we're talking about maintaining the maximum amount of right tilt, this will be you in your finish at the moment, with the spine very erect. Tilting to the right is making this move. So we're maxing out the right tilt. And that right tilt is created by the continuous sliding of the hips. So hip slide in the finish is in the direction of that arrow I've just put on the screen. So the better you become at sliding the lower body, stabilising the upper body, the better your swing is going to look from down the line, and also the more maintenance of the angles you're going to have coming into the golf swing. So hopefully this helps. If you've got any questions, feel free to find me an email. I will also, at some point, I'm away this weekend, I will forward you some other images relating to this lesson and the things that I'd like you to work on. Whilst it's fresh in my mind, if you go onto my channel and want to watch some videos, there's a young guy I've been working with now for a few years called Dave Ianson, and he's worked extensively on improving the move that you're having trouble with. David moved out in front of the golf ball with both centres and uncocked the wrists probably as much as anybody I've ever seen. And 2 years down the line, he's looking really, really good coming into the golf ball. And if you watch David's recaps throughout, there'll be about a dozen on there. There'll be some really good ideas for things for you to work on. And also there'll be some really nice demonstrations of the feelings and drills I've suggested during this video lesson. Good luck with it. Hope it works out well. Look forward to your feedback. And good luck. Should you need anything, feel free to drop me an email.